Writing the West. Stories and poems by Rick Steber. Read by Michael Messner and friends. State of Jefferson. The land between the Umpqua River on the north and the Trinity Alps to the south has at one time or another been under the control of Spain, England, Russia, Mexico, and the United States. But residents of the territory now governed by bureaucrats in Sacramento and Salem have often dreamed of forming their own state. The first serious effort to establish a new state began with a bill introduced into the 1852 California legislature. The residents were revolting against high taxes, poor mail service, and the lack of adequate military protection. They felt they would be better off as an independent state. One area newspaper pleaded the case.
This new state presents a country of uniform character and is distinct from the rest of either California or Oregon. Let our local resources be developed by a government identified with our locality. Let us have a voice in the national councils where we can urge upon Congress our wants.
The bill died in legislative committee, just as other such attempts have failed in succeeding years. It seems that once every generation some would-be politician tries to rekindle the fire of revolution. Such was the case with the state of Jefferson. The state of Jefferson gained national attention in November 1941 when residents of Yreka, California set roadblocks on U.S. Highway 99 to interrogate travelers crossing the Jefferson state line. But the Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor cut short the life of the fledgling state. Today, the spirit of the state of Jefferson lies dormant in the hearts of its citizens. The Holdup. John McNamar grew up fast. As a boy, he came west over the Oregon Trail, and by the time he was 16 years old, he was a volunteer soldier fighting in the Indian Wars. After the natives were subdued, John drifted south to California and caught on driving a stagecoach on a Wells Fargo route between Redding and the mines. On October 24, 1875, John was making a run, hauling a strongbox and 3 passengers. He was driving a 6-horse team across a twisting mountain trail when an armed masked man suddenly stepped from behind a tree. He pointed a rifle at John and ordered,
"Throw down the strongbox! This is a holdup!"
John reined the horses in and did exactly as he was instructed. He tossed the strongbox to the ground and said,
"You've got the money. Can I clear out?"
"Yeah, get going,"
growled the robber. John moved the horses ahead about a quarter mile and stopped. He set the brake, tied off the lines, and climbed down. Then he whispered to the passengers,
"Stay put and stay quiet,"
and started back towards the robbers. There was the sharp crack of a rifle, and John figured the robber had blown the lock on the strongbox. He continued forward, slipping from tree to tree until he had a commanding view of the masked man bent over the open Wells Fargo strongbox, counting the cash. John called out,
"Hold it right there. I've got the drop on you. Stand up nice and slow. Get your hands over your head."
For his heroic action, Wells Fargo rewarded John with a gold pocket watch. But the local school fund was the real winner. The schools received the robber's pocket change, all $1,025 of it. Names. Floyd was a fry cook in a white apron, wearing spots of grease and other bits of matter that proved totally unidentifiable. Ruthie was a brutally efficient waitress, with layers and lines to enhance her eyes with hues of blue and green and brown. Floyd and Ruthie were the reigning king and queen of the roadside diner where I stopped to eat. Their names are forever imprinted on my memory. Trail of Feathers. One time in 1854, members of a wagon train to Oregon came across several cabins scattered around a spring. They stopped and called, but could not raise anyone. That seemed strange. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the cabins had been ransacked and the inhabitants were missing. One of the men suggested,
"Well, let's just take a look around outside."
They fanned out in the sagebrush looking for tracks or other signs of life, but found nothing, until one of the searchers discovered a feather. This led to another feather, and another, and another. Evidently, a leaky feather mattress had been part of the plunder. Several men were left to guard the wagons while the others rode along the trail of feathers. They proceeded slowly through foothills until at last they came to a high ridge. They dismounted and crawled to a position where they could peer over the edge without being skylined. In the valley below, they saw natives dancing around a fire and lying face down in the dirt, hands bound behind their backs, were a number of white captives. The pioneers pulled back and a rescue plan was quickly scratched on the ground. They would surround the camp and swoop in from all directions at once. The plan worked perfectly, and the settlers to the last man were rescued, thanks to the Trail of Feathers. The Milk Cow. Much of the West was considered open range until the homesteaders arrived to string barbed wire around land they claimed as their own. The Homestead Act of 1862 entitled any citizen of the United States to acquire 160 acres of the public domain, provided they lived on the property for 5 years. In 1877, the Desert Land Act allowed homesteaders to claim 320 acres if they lived on the land and irrigated it. John Haley, a wagon freighter, related the following story about a homesteader.
Well, I was down to Rock Creek Crossing. Feller named Butler settled there on a homestead a couple of years back. Had himself quite a pile of meadow hay. Stopped to see if I could buy a little for my team. And Butler said, Nah, I can't spare none. Need it for my own stock. Well, now I knew he hadn't come in there with much, and I mentioned the fact. And he agreed, said, when I took my claim, only had 1 yoke of steers and an old milk cow. But by careful management, I now have 35 head, mostly calves and yearlings. Well, I scratched my head. It's pretty evident he'd been helping himself to calves on the open range. But a man doesn't want to just come right out and call someone a cattle rustler.
Haley pointed out that Butler's milk cow was quite special and offered to buy it from him. Needless to say, Butler didn't sell. You've been listening to Writing the West. The stories and poetry in this podcast are by Rick Stieber and appear in books by him. Log on to www.rickstieberauthor.com to find out more. This program was produced by Michael Messner by permission of the author. Special thanks to Michael Tucker and Art Shingler. Thank you for listening.